Welcome to this broadcast of Reflections on World Religions. We are studying not the theology, but the ethics taught by different world traditions. Today we're fortunate to have with us priest Sosan Flynn. Let's begin by talking about you. Tell us who you are and a little bit of your journey.
All right. Well, my name is Sosan Teresa Flynn. Sosan is my Buddhist name. Um, and I'm the guiding teacher at Clouds and Water Zen Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Um, let's see, what can I say about myself? So interesting personal facts. I was raised Catholic. So in a pretty, I would say, spirituality was part of growing up. It wasn't just church on Sunday. It was prayer before meals, and it seemed that, and I went to Catholic schools my whole life, so it really seemed like paying attention to the spiritual aspect of life was something that was valued in my family, and in me. And that became engendered in me. And as I became an adult and I think in my 20s, like most adults, I sort of wasn't really like faithfully practicing Catholicism, but so I sort of fell away, but then I started being interested again and started going to church again. And I actually helped my sister get her find a good church for her kids that had a nice progressive, because we're kind of on the progressive side, religious education for her kids. And so for me, sort of joining back in, then it was like I really wanted to go deeply. And what I started doing was attending, just going here and there to convents and retreat centers, and either participating in a organized retreat or mostly just going by myself and spending a day or two. And through that process, I realized that what I was really interested in most of all was being able to just be in God's presence. I think there's a psalm that goes something like, I would rather spend 1,000 years sitting at the gates, whatever the imagery, I just wanted to be present. And what I realized is that when I sat down to pray or contemplative prayer and didn't have like a plan, like I didn't have something that I was reading or something that I was asking God for, or something that, I was, yeah, then I couldn't just be there. It seemed really, really hard to just be there to receive whatever was going to rise. And so that's when I realized I needed to have some way to calm my mind.
How did
And
that progress from your personal journey to becoming a spiritual leader in your faith?
yeah, right. So that's kind of interesting. So when I asked around, where can I learn meditation, then someone just happened to direct me to the Buddhists. So they said, why don't you go to this Buddhist center, the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center in Minneapolis. Um, and so I went there. I started learning about Buddhism. I started learning about meditation, first of all. And then that was really helpful. As I learned more about Buddhism and meditation practice and the whole religious uh, package of Buddhism, for me, it felt more restful. It felt more restful isn't the right word. I felt more at home. And it wasn't so much a rejection of Christianity or Catholicism. I mean, I felt like that was really, it was at the time even really something that was still important to me. And for a long time, I went to Mass, where I would go a really early morning to meditation and hear a Dharma talk. And then I would pick up my sister and her kids and we'd go to Mass. And that was my Sunday was like really, really busy. And then I just felt more and more drawn to the actual Buddhist teachings. And it was sort of hard to do both. And I kind of realized if I wanted to deeply enter into Buddhist practice, that my time was limited. So I had to choose. And so I chose Zen Buddhism. And then just the more I was drawn into it, I guess I've always been kind of a leader person in my life. And when I was a little kid, other kids would play house, I would play church, and I'd be the priest. So, but I knew I could never be a priest in the Catholic Church as a woman. So it was just like that was playing. But so I was just really interested in helping people. Like if this is something that's helped me, then I could share it with others. We could share it together. We can help each other. And actually, I was doing some exploration of that even before I got involved in Buddhism with friends. We were just exploring different religious and spiritual traditions and kind of making up our own rituals, just trying to find meaning in our lives. And so I just continue to be interested in helping me and others find meaning or live in a way that feels wholesome and aligned with a higher good.
What kind of formal education was required for you to make the transition from follower to leader?
Yeah, so that's interesting. In the United States, there's not so much of a formal education for Buddhist priests and leaders. Um, I happen to have a master's degree in counseling psychology, which has been greatly helpful to me as a leader and as a pastoral care person, meeting with people. But otherwise, it's really more of an apprenticeship model. So students are working with their teacher. They're, as they become more leaders, they're working side by side. Like what I do with my students is, they'll watch me teach, and then I'll, watch them teach and give them feedback and like that. I didn't have maybe so much of that with my teachers, but a little bit of that. Definitely teaching together we did. And I felt like the responding to students, that's something that I learned through my formal education in counseling psychology. And for my students now, and the other students here at Clouds and Water who are training to be priests and leaders, we're looking at, okay, if there's not something within Buddhism, is there something in an adjacent religion or another, tradition like pastoral counseling where people can get some more formal training? But otherwise, yeah, there's not a lot of formal training that's required to be a leader.
Would you share briefly the history of Buddhism as far as its origins?
Yes. So the Buddha was an actual historical figure, born in, well, often we say India, but I think it was actually Nepal, the area of Nepal now, about 2,600 years ago. And it's hard to know how much of his story is actually true and how much is, people have, it's become myth and legend, but he was some kind of his father was some kind of a political leader, whether a king or, anyway. And he was some kind of a prince. I think that's the word that's usually used, Siddhartha. And he was sheltered for much of his life. And then as he became a young adult, he was interested in seeing the world and was very interested in, or he was saddened by seeing so much suffering in the world. And so there were other people who were practicing renunciation and finding a way to end suffering for themselves. And so he went off on a spiritual journey and studied with many different teachers, and then and actually was very austere practices, little sleep, starving himself, etc. But finally, he realized that was not the way, that wasn't working. So he took just enough food, he got some sleep, and then once he was sort of refreshed enough, it said he sat down under the Bodhi tree and said he would sit there until he realized the truth of this life and the truth of how suffering would end. So anyway, it's said that then he realized the Four Noble Truths at that point, was that there is suffering. Suffering is caused by our greed and attachments. It is possible for, there is a path through suffering, or sometimes say possible to end suffering. It's not exactly ending, but it's anyway, end the kind of suffering that we're talking about. Now, it's not, you can never really end, like if I stub my toe, it's going to hurt. There's going to be pain, but to end the suffering that I'm heaping on top of that by saying this shouldn't have happened, etc. So seeing that it is possible actually for there to be liberation, and then that there is a way to liberation, a path to liberation, which is classically the Eightfold Path, although there's many different ways to describe it. So anyway, that's the Buddha story. And then Buddhism spread, not so much in his lifetime even, although, but then after he died, it started to spread throughout the region. And then like my form of Buddhism is Zen Buddhism. So we trace our origins to say from India and Nepal to China. And each place that it traveled, it was influenced by the religions and spirituality and culture of that place. So when it went to China, it was influenced by Confucianism with the sort of rule-based, and also by Taoism, which is more spacious and open oneness. So those two things like influence strongly, and especially for in my practice of Zen Buddhism, there's a lot of influences of Taoism that can be found. And anyway, and then for my tradition, it went to Japan, but also went to Korea, and so it was spreading to different places. And then then it went all the way around the world to North America and South America. And now Buddhism, I would say, not only just here in North America, but really worldwide, there's so much cross-fertilization going on, all these different, because these different lines developed. We could say there's three main lines: Theravadan Buddhism, which really traces its roots more directly to India and Nepal. And then Mahayana, which is Zen is included in that. And that is more traced, I think, to China, Japan, maybe Korea also. And then Vajrayana, which I know the least about, but I know Tibet is kind of the main place where that's practiced, but where the origin of that. So those are the main three. And all of those three now worldwide are like influencing each other, because there's so much we can know because of the internet and information explosion. So there's a lot of what's happening in Buddhism, I don't know.
That's great. One question before we leave the historical aspect: did Buddha write anything himself? Most religious leaders did not write; their disciples later wrote about them. Did he write anything that's known?
No. Not that I know of. In fact, most of the things that are written, it starts out saying, "Thus I have heard," and then it's someone telling the story of what the Buddha said.
And the primary text, oldest text for Buddhism is?
Well, what's that?
The Analects of Buddhism?
So I think most people call it the Tripitaka. Anyway, Tripitaka, and that's 3 baskets is the literal translation. And so in those, one basket is codes, like codes of conduct. Another is the sutras, which is the teachings of the Buddha, thus I've heard. And then the third basket is called the higher teaching.
Please share with us your understanding of the ethical standards and virtues built around the Buddhist tradition.
Four Noble Truths, suffering, the cause of suffering, liberation, and the cause of liberation, or the way to liberation, the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path is one way of looking at the ethical standards. And I can talk briefly on that in a moment. 3 refuges, the 3 pure precepts, which will be familiar in any religion: do no harm, do good, save all beings, or help everyone. I guess that's the short way. And then there's the 10 momentous prohibitory precepts, which sound a lot like the 10 Commandments. I mean, not exactly, but the first one is do not kill. The second one is do not steal. The third one is do not misuse sexuality. The fourth one is do not lie. So anyway, so that's really, that kind of gets more specific. And then there's another framework called the 6 paramitas, or perfections. And so I know I won't have time to talk about all of these. So I could just talk about the Eightfold Path a little bit, and maybe that's helpful.
That's probably most constructive.
Yeah. Although the Eightfold Path is a framework for sort of living and understanding the world, and then the actual like ethical guidelines is a small part of it.
Hmm.
So, but I think that's important, is like it's not just rules to follow. It's a way of understanding ourselves and the world, that if we deeply do that, then we're going to be ethical. So there's that sometimes it's helpful to have a rule like do not kill. But more than that, it's important to like, what is the overall flavor? What is the overall approach or orientation to life and the world that we have? And so I think the Eightfold Path does help with that quite a lot. So the Eightfold Path is right view, right thinking, and I'll say right, that's the traditional interpretation of the Sanskrit word, but probably a better word is beneficial, because right gets into right and wrong. So it's helpful or beneficial. So maybe I'll say that. I'll just say beneficial view, beneficial thinking, beneficial speech, beneficial action, which is really the crux of the ethics, I think, is action. Well, speech and action. Beneficial livelihood, beneficial effort, beneficial mindfulness, and beneficial concentration. And it's helpful sometimes to think about that there's ways that these 8 can be organized into 3 different categories. So one category of ethical conduct would include the speech, action, and livelihood. And then another category of the mental discipline would include the effort, mindfulness, and concentration. And then the third category of wisdom would include thinking and understanding.
Great.
So should I try to talk a little bit about each of those?
Well, I think there's so many. Yes, to take each one and just mention what it means.
All right.
Very briefly, please.
Okay. So right view, or right understanding, or beneficial understanding is a view of seeing things just as they are. And what that means is that we practice letting go of our own ideas in order to open to, we call the suchness of things. So like things just as they are, beyond my idea of them. So even taking something as simple as like my cup of water. So I have an idea that, a lot of ideas around this cup. But if I have an idea, then I'm not seeing it beyond what is, my limited view. So my limited view is like, okay, it's shaped. I have a description of the shape, kind of more or less cylindrical shape. It's open on the top. It has water in it. It's for me to use, to drink. And all of those things are true. But there's also a truth, even from a scientific point of view, like, well, there's a lot of empty space in here because there's atoms and, and actually it looks like this, but if I looked at it at the, atomic level, it wouldn't look like this at all. It would look just like vast empty space. And so right view is just kind of seeing beyond our usual way. And it can really be freeing to have a right view, or beneficial view. And then thinking kind of goes along, beneficial thinking kind of goes along with that. Usually we say it's thinking that includes the wish to cultivate understanding in ourselves and others in order to bring happiness. So there's many things I could think about, but the main thing is that I don't hold my thoughts rigidly. So I could ask myself, are you sure? And also I could, if I notice that I'm like spinning around certain thoughts, I could say, oh, could I let go of that? Because like actually going down this train of thought is not helpful to myself or others. And then I can fall back into, to looking at right view to help me loosen up around that. Then there's beneficial speech, which simply we could say is speaking the truth, speaking at the right time, speaking when someone is ready to hear what I have to say. Those are some elements of beneficial speech.
Action is the real crux of the matter in my
Mhm.
mind when it comes to ethics and virtues.
Mhm.
All of the others certainly have implication. How do you outline virtuous actions? What are those as opposed to non-virtuous actions?
Yeah. Well, the three pure precepts are really what inform all of the virtuous actions. So we could say, is this action non-harming? So the very first of the three pure precepts is not to do harm. Sometimes it says not to do evil, or not to engage in unwholesome actions. But I think the saying do no harm is the easiest way of understanding that. And then the second pure precept is do good. So you're not just not doing harm, but you're also actually proactively doing something good and then helping others. So those are the three that are like the barometers of like any other thing that we talk about. It's like how is it embodying those three? And then because we're human beings and we need something more specific, we do have these 10 momentous precepts.
Livelihood is particularly unique in my mind,
Yes.
as it's expressed. Articulate your understanding of that.
Yeah. So classically, right livelihood was Buddhist followers were told not to, well, basically, it's not to engage, not to make a living from a profession which would cause harm to others. So classically, that would mean you're not trading in arms or lethal weapons. You're not selling intoxicants or poisons.
Mhm.
And you're not in a profession that's killing animals, like slaughtering livestock. And or cheating. So
And what about the last three?
yeah, so right effort. This is, I think, a really important one. And I have to say that it's like how it's sort of sometimes it's shown in the middle of all of the eight, because it in a way it's needed to practice all of the eight, needing to have right effort or beneficial effort. And it's about not being too rigid or too relaxed. It's like just the right amount of putting your energy into something. So effort is about energy and how you're engaging with your life, with your practices. So to engage in a way that is sustainable for yourself, where you can keep going, is I think about right effort.
And the final two?
Yeah, so the final two are mostly what people think about when they hear Zen meditation. And a lot of times, like these were emphasized to the neglect of the others. And I think especially in white convert Buddhism in the last 50 years, or I should say maybe like 50 some years ago when it first was becoming popular. The hippies were some of the first that got involved, and but others too. And it was really like meditation, mindfulness, and concentration were emphasized. But they are important, but the other things are important too. So mindfulness is just about awareness of what's going on in the moment. So it's just simple, like what it is. You can think, well, anybody could do that, but it's really kind of hard to do, actually, because usually we're either thinking ahead of something else, or we're thinking behind of something that happened, whether that's like way in the future, way in the past, or even recent, like anticipating what's going to happen next or what I just said. So in order to develop mindfulness, it really helps to be aware, bring awareness to our bodies. That's how we practice. Like that's why like the meditation pose or awareness of breath is often something that's used, or awareness of our sensations and feelings or our minds, and what's happening with our thoughts. Um, so we a lot of times we're encouraged to just practice throughout our day, practice mindfulness. Like as I reach my hand and turn the doorknob, I'm aware that I'm doing it. As I'm walking to my car, I'm aware that I'm doing that. I'm aware of my steps on the ground. So that's basic mindfulness. Anybody can do it. You don't have to be a Zen practitioner. and
Let me,
then concentration. Or you want to say more about that?
no, I want to ask you a question about this.
Yeah.
All of this that we've gone through, and I love the fact that Buddhism is so organized and articulate. Are there textual references in some of the ancient writings from which these come, or is this just amalgamation of developed concepts and precepts?
Well, one book that is my absolute favorite go-to book is The Heart of Buddha's Teaching, and it's by Thich Nhat Hanh. He outlined so many of these basic uh, Buddhist teachings that we've been talking about, and he does it in a way that's very accessible and very practice oriented. So it's like how you can live with this, how you can practice with, how you can take up the um, the teachings of these in your own life, in your daily life.
Okay. Have we covered a general overview of the ethics of?
I think so. I mean, the one that I left off of the Eightfold Path was right concentration or beneficial concentration.
Mhm.
And so that is a little bit like mindfulness, but it goes maybe a level deeper, because it also is about the ability to let go.
Mhm.
So it's not just like paying attention to something, but it's like it's more spacious, and letting go. But um, it's really it is a mental discipline. Of there's two kinds. There's one of active concentration where you're just aware of whatever comes up, or then selective concentration where you choose one thing to be aware of. But even within that, it's all, it's letting go as well.
Would you agree that Buddhism might be the world religion that best fits with other religions?
In my opinion, yes. But it's hard to say. I haven't studied all the other religions, but from what I know of a little bit about Christianity, or a lot, I guess, about Catholicism and a little bit about some of the other religions, it seems like there's a kind of openness, at least in the types of Buddhism I practice. Like there's really an openness because of the very first thing of that your beneficial view is that you're not clinging to the idea of one view of things. And so then that allows other views to come in.
We want to thank Priest Suzanne Flynn for joining us today and sharing her expertise about Buddhism. The following is a brief summary of what we've learned. The three pure precepts of Buddhism: do no harm, do good, and help others. The Four Noble Truths of Buddhism are: life is suffering, there is a cause for suffering, which is greed, and the end of suffering and liberation is the Eightfold Path of life. The Eightfold Path consists of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, and right mindfulness. Thank you for joining us. Let us remember that as we understand, we become more tolerant. As we understand and become more tolerant, we help build peace within ourselves and within our world community.